Welcome to Majira TV's geopolitical show, Notre Monde. I'm Anna Pouvreau. He was tall and handsome and very charismatic. He had the courage and energy to fight the ruthless Russian power. His name is Alexei Navalny. He says he's been turned into a little old man by poison. When you think about modern weaponry and lethal weapons, you usually think about supersonic weapons, high precision, long range, and detectable guided missiles. But poison is the oldest weapon you could ever think of. According to the Russian journalist Arkady Vaksberg, since Lenin, the Soviet state has always used poisons to murder dissidents and spies. Poison is useful to disguise secret assassinations into natural deaths. Remember the murder of Bulgarian novelist Georgy Markov in 1978 in London. Ricin, a highly potent toxin, was fired into his leg with an umbrella by the Bulgarian intelligence services. Former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko was poisoned in 2004 during his election campaign by ingesting TCDD, the most potent dioxin and contaminant in Agent Orange. He suffered disfigurement as a result of the poisoning. In 2006, Alexander Litvinenko, a defector and former FSB agent, was poisoned by two FSB officers in central London with polonium, a rare, lethal, and highly radioactive substance. Two British Airways airplanes, a hotel, and some streets in London were contaminated. In March 2018, double agent Sergey Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned by two Russian military intelligence officers with Novichok, a military-grade poison, in Salisbury, United Kingdom. The whole town was contaminated. A policeman, Nick Bailey, fell ill, and an innocent 44-year-old woman, Dawn Sturgis, died after exposure to Novichok. But poison is not reserved for spies, and in Russia, the journalist and activist Vladimir Kara-Murza was poisoned twice in 2015 and 2017. Navalny is a Russian opposition leader, a lawyer, a politician, and most importantly, an anti-corruption activist. He was arrested several times, and so was his brother. He tried to run in the 2018 presidential elections, but was barred by the Russian Election Commission. On August 20th, 2020, Navalny was hospitalized after a Novichok poisoning during a flight from Siberia to Moscow. 2 days later, he was transported to Berlin on a medical evacuation flight. He was discharged on September 22nd after a long coma. Navalny said that there are barely any known cases of people who survived Novichok, and that he was poisoned with a different kind of Novichok. He told Masha Gessen, a journalist from the New Yorker, "Novichok was apparently on something I touched. They say that if you inhale it, you die very quickly. If you ingest it with food, you're dead within an hour. If you touch it, it takes about 3 hours. But no one knows where it was. No one knows how this new version of Novichok acts. This scares people very effectively." He also said, "This is a thing from hell. Chemical weapons are rightly banned. Conventional weapons can be used to kill people, but also to protect them. These substances are intended solely for making people die a very painful death. My question is, What should the West do in this very asymmetric war? My guests today are award-winning journalists Luke Harding from The Guardian newspaper and Jacopo Iacoboni from La Stampa. Luke Harding, you are a British journalist, writer, and award-winning foreign correspondent with The Guardian newspaper. You have covered wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Between 2007 and 2011, you were The Guardian's bureau chief in Moscow. You are the author of several best-selling books, among which A Very Expensive Poison, about the murder of Alexander Litvinenko in 2006. Your latest book, Shadow State, Murder, Mayhem, and Russia's Remaking of the West, was published this year. My first question to you is, what do the Russians try to tell us by coming to our Western countries and killing people? Does it tell something about the state of our Western democracies?
Well, hello, Anna. I mean, it's a good question. I think the answer is that you have to understand how the Kremlin, made up of Vladimir Putin and people like him, many of whom are from the KGB, think about the world and relations with the West in particular. And essentially their view, their kind of mental map is Cold War. And actually it's quite Leninist. I mean, Lenin saw Moscow, then Soviet Moscow, as in a state of kind of permanent war or kind of semi-war with capitalist countries. And actually Putin has taken that idea over. He sees Russia in opposition to the United States, the main enemy, but also to France, Germany, the UK, and sees it as a sort of permanent undercover struggle. And murder is one instrument that was very much used by the Soviet Union against internal critics, but also sort of emigres living abroad. And it's something that Putin has adopted. And we've seen over the past 10, 15 years, we've seen death squads being sent out to kill Chechen emigres, to kill political dissidents like Alexander Litvinenko, whom you mentioned in your introduction, and also people that Putin regards as traitors to Russia, such as Sergey Skripal, who was a member of Russian military intelligence and who, of course, was poisoned with Novichok in my country, in the UK, in the spring of 2018.
Do you think that your book on the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, A Very Expensive Poison, was useful in raising awareness about the true nature of Putin's Russia?
Yes, I mean, the true nature of Putin's Russia, I think, is pretty clear to most people now, that it's not a democracy or a semi-democracy, that it's really quite a dark authoritarian state. And more than that, it's a state with revisionist ambitions that wants to tilt the map in its favor. We've seen the annexation of Crimea in 2014. We've seen wars that I've covered in Russia's near abroad, in Georgia in 2008. And we've seen large-scale military intervention by Russia in Syria to prop up Bashar al-Assad. So it's a regime with global ambitions, but also which uses the Soviet playbook in things like poisoning critics, bring together all of the evidence accumulated by police, by scientists, and so on in this sort of criminal case, and lay it out in kind of quite a thrilling way. And I think that's important, because what Russia is also very good at is propaganda and disinformation and muddying the waters, is the sort of phrase in English, and making people confused as to what's really going on. I mean, it's almost a war on truth, if you like. And so by setting down empirically what happened in the sensational story of a dissident being poisoned with a radioactive cup of tea, I think it was certainly a wake-up call for those who hadn't been paying attention closely.
Mm-hmm. After the publication in 2020 of your new book, Shadow State, which analyzes Putin's methods used to destabilize the West, has anything really changed in the West to counter these new threats?
Well, I mean, I think some things have changed. I mean, I think things have changed in America, actually. And what happened in the US in 2016 is that there was a sophisticated, opportunistic, multi-level operation by Putin and his spy agencies to support Donald Trump and to try and destroy Hillary Clinton. And it was remarkably successful, which is not to say that Trump wasn't to some large extent a kind of homegrown, well, you can call him a monster or you can call him a successful politician of genius, but someone who was sort of created by fault lines in American society. But it's undoubtedly true that the Russians helped him win. And what we've seen is a sort of reckoning. I mean, there's been a report by Robert Mueller which laid out the multiple connections between the Trump campaign and Moscow, and another really important report, somewhat unnoticed by the Senate Intelligence Committee in August, which said the same thing. So I think awareness of Russian meddling is greater. I think people realize that Putin has been trying to play God in French elections, in Spain, where the Kremlin has been supporting secessionist movements, in the UK over Brexit. But what is missing actually is a sort of strategy among Western politicians as to how they deal with this. You don't want to exaggerate the Russian threat, but nor should you ignore it.
The European Union and the United Kingdom have imposed sanctions on 6 senior Russian officials in a chemical center after the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. What do you suggest our European governments do to counter the poison threat?
Yes, I mean, this is the big geopolitical challenge of our time. How do you deal with a rogue state, which I think is what Russia has become in recent years, at a time when obviously full-blown military conflict no one wants, where there's a global pandemic, where economic conditions are bad, resources are stretched, and so on. And I think the smartest, most targeted answer is to do more of what Western states are doing, which is to sort of target the people around Putin, whether they're spy agency bosses, whether they're oligarchs or other intermediaries who do the Kremlin's bidding. Because what you have to understand about this regime in Moscow is that outwardly it is hyper-patriotic. It is all about Russia, about Crimea, about how Putin has made Russia a great power again. But actually inwardly, privately, what the Russian elite, what the people around Putin really care about is their money. They've become stupendously rich after 2 decades of Putin. They're some of the wealthiest people on the planet, worth many billions of dollars. And by pushing them out of Western countries, denying them visas, freezing their assets, banning them from the banking system, this is quite painful. This is quite painful for people who have wine collections in Switzerland, who have yachts moored off Corsica, who like own property in London, like sending their kids to British schools, or have flats in New York and so on. So I think you need smart sanctions applied to people at the very top of the Kremlin, which makes their life unpleasant in some way.
I see. And as a last question, what is, in your opinion, the worst case scenario as far as Russia's future is concerned?
Well, I mean, it's hard to see a kind of good scenario for Russia. I mean, there are some positive trends. I think Alexei Navalny, whom you mentioned, who was poisoned in August in Siberia, now recovering in Germany, having somehow come into contact with Novichok, this lethal nerve agent. I mean, I think he's a positive sign. He's a genuine opposition leader. He's brave. He's clever. He's sarcastic. He more than anybody has actually shone light in dark places and exposed top-level corruption by Putin and the people around him. So there are positive signs. There is a young generation who've known nothing but Putin and want change, and who are kind of politically engaged. The problem is that actually the regime is very entrenched. Putin has just won a constitutional vote, not a real vote, a kind of fake vote, but clearing the way for him to stay in power. Well, if not forever, then until at least 2036, when he'll be in his early 80s. And essentially what we have in Russia is a dictatorship, personalist regime run by one guy. And while Putin is there, nothing will change. My fear is that once Putin goes, and I think, of course, the most likely scenario is that he will leave the Kremlin horizontally, like Leonid Brezhnev, his Soviet predecessor, that we'll have a new Putin, a kind of neo-Putin, another figure from intelligence and security background, rather than a kind of democratic Russia, an authentically Russian Russia, but the kind of democratic Russia that actually the country deserves after a long period of dark totalitarian rule under the Soviets and really pretty murky rule too under Vladimir Putin, where Russia essentially is a kind of spoiler in world affairs and is domestically repressive and run by an unaccountable, really feudal style elite.
Yes, so a very dark picture.
I'm afraid so. I wish I had better news, but I think at the moment there's no point in being naive, but there's also no point in losing hope, because actually we live in an era of kind of fast time, of interconnectedness, where Russia, the TV is stable, but the internet to some degree is free. Find alternative information. If you look at the interview that Alexei Navalny gave after he survived being poisoned, it's been viewed more than 20 million times. So there is an appetite for change, and I just, perhaps the last thought is that things do happen unexpectedly in Russia. I mean, it's a place of upheaval and revolution, famously, and while it looks pretty hopeless for now, actually change can come out of a clear sky. So let's see what happens next. But for now, Putin and the people around him are very much in power and very keen to defend power and to not allow what's been happening in Belarus next door, where there have been huge mass protests against Alexander Lukashenko, another dictator who's stayed in power for too long. They really want to avoid that scenario in Russia, and they will do everything they can to stop it from happening.
Any message for our Western politicians, the Brits, the Italians, the French, the Germans?
Well, I guess the message for them is clean up your own system, because one of the sort of slightly diabolical things about Vladimir Putin is that he believes, I mean, he's a nihilist. He's a kind of extreme cynic. He believes that human rights, values, all of the things the European Union stands for, that they're a joke, that they're a facade, they're not real, and that ultimately the world is all about power politics. It's about deals. It's about kind of grubby alliances, and that everybody has their price, that you can buy any politician, whether it's French or Italian or German, so long as the price is right. And he's had quite a lot of success, whether you look at Silvio Berlusconi or Gerhard Schröder in Germany, or Gusenbauer in Austria, or Marine Le Pen in France, who's taken money from kind of Kremlin-connected banks, and so on. And I think the most depressing trend really is the way that Kremlin actors or people linked to the Kremlin have successfully bought up assets in Europe, whether it's newspapers or industries or businesses, and have managed to kind of influence the political class. And that's especially true in my country, in the UK, where Russian donors or Moscow-born donors have donated millions to the Conservative Party. And Boris Johnson has over the summer created a huge scandal by ennobling making a peer of someone called Yevgeny Lebedev, who is a powerful newspaper owner in this country and whose father just happens to be a former KGB spy. So what we need to do is not think of Russia as a faraway problem of corruption there. We need to look at how that Russian corruption is spilling over into our own societies and into our own politics. And actually, we need to do something about it before it's too late.
Luke Hardings, thank you so much for your insight on these crucial issues.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Jacopo Iacoboni, you are an award-winning Italian journalist working for La Stampa newspaper. You have been reporting on the rise of populist parties in Europe, on Russia's influence in Italy, and on disinformation. You are the author of 2 best-selling books, The Experiment, L'Esperimento, in 2018, and The Execution, L'Esecuzione, in 2019, both about the rise of Italy's 5-star movement, the Cinque Stelle Movimento MS5, which is part of the coalition government. My first question to you is, how did you react to the poisoning of Alexei Navalny last August in Russia?
Oh, well, good morning to you. Well, of course, it was, I think, a quasi obvious reaction because we know now a lot of things, and we have a huge amount of information about the Russian warfare within its boundaries, and not just within the Russian boundaries. And for example, respect 2005 or 2006, when there was the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko. So we know now much more things. And the first reaction I had was I suspected immediately that it has been an attempt to kill Alexander Navalny. And my first thought, I have to say, it's easy to say, was that Navalny was poisoned. Of course, we had to wait more weeks to try to assess with much more confidence the eventual poisoning. And now, what I think that now we can assess with a huge amount of confidence through at least 2 independent labs in Europe, in France and Sweden, that Alexei Navalny has been poisoned. No, we don't know just that he has been poisoned, but we also know that the poison, it was a new version of the Novichok, which is, as you well know, a poison which is produced and managed through old Soviet and then former Soviet labs in Russia. And this is a new version, but we can be reasonably sure that there are at least 3 independent assessments of the poisoning of Navalny through the new Novichok. And we also know that there are very few persons in the world that can manage this kind of operation. And for sure, what I think is that the poisoning through Novichok is in the capability of the Russian Internal Secret Service, the FSB, and possibly also the military service, the GRU. And so I think that we can be reasonably sure about the Navalny case now. What I think is that many people say, why the Russian should have been poisoned Navalny if it was so easy to discover the poisoning. But it's not easy at all. It's not easy at all. You need a very specialized lab, and there are few labs of this kind in the world. And you also need that there is no much amount of time between the poisoning and the findings through the labs. And we know for sure that the Russians have been trying since the beginning to delete the trip of Navalny Hill through Germany, through Berlin. So what I suppose is that they hoped that in 48 hours it could have been easier to make disappear every trace of the poisoning. Mm-hmm. And so that's it. I think that with the Navalny case, we have now a very good amount of evidence. And we also have the first interviews of Navalny himself, as you know. Navalny is pretty sure that he has been with a new kind of poison, and he described very, very closely and very, very impressively his first reactions in the plane from Siberia to Moscow, and that's it. I think that unfortunately we live in a geopolitical moment in which we are used to an increasingly aggressive way of acting from the Kremlin. And if Navalny, as I think, has been poisoned from the from men of the secret services, I think this is impossible to do for the Secret Service without an explicit consent from the President of Russia.
I see. And back in 2018 and 2006, how did you react at the time to the poisoning of Litvinenko and of the cripples by Russian intelligence service in Britain? What was your reaction?
Oh, well, Anna, it was a very different reaction because as I said before, we didn't know a lot of things that we know now. And my first reaction then was, it was November 2006. So just 1 month earlier, there was the killing of, in the early October, of Hanna Politovskaya. And it was not so far from the poisoning with dioxin of Yushchenko, a presidential candidate in Ukraine. He was poisoned with dioxin. And already then we knew that the Russians have a very long history, a Soviet history of poisoning, going back to the political police of Lenin, the Cheka, the former KGB. So what we in Italy perceived of the poisoning of Litvinenko at the first glance was the relationship that Litvinenko had with a very controversial Italian guy named Mario Scaramella. Mario Scaramella was a counselor of an Italian commission of the secret archives of a former KGB agent, Vasily Mitrokhin. And there was a huge speculation because Scaramella told in Italy according to Italian newspaper, that Litvinenko told him that the former Italian Prime Minister, Romano Prodi, was a man of KGB. We in Italy never find evidence of this alleged claim from Scaramella and Litvinenko. And you know that Litvinenko, the very day in which he was poisoned from the Lugovoy and Kotvin, he met at lunchtime in London in a restaurant in London. He met Mario Scaramella. So Scaramella was one of the last persons to meet Alexander Litvinenko. So in Italy, we were very impressed from the story. This is Italian side of the story. What I can say, of course, that we know that Litvinenko revealed a lot of things about the Russian mafia crimes, especially in Spain. And he provided a lot of information driving directly to the Putin inner circle. So I think this is, of course, the reason he has been poisoned.
Yes, Jacopo, in your recent books, you've pointed out the international connections of the five-star movement with Russia. What do you think are the implications of these connections for Italy and for the rest of Europe?
Oh, this is a very long story, because as you may know, Italy, as the United Kingdom, not so far from the United Kingdom and from the United States, has been at the forefront of the populism, of the rise of populism last years. Just to stay at the conclusion of this story, in 2018, in March 4, the five-star had a very huge victory in the Italian general election. And they governed more than 1 year together with the far right in Italy, the Italian Lega, the Lega Nord of Matteo Salvini. And but what is interesting is, while we know a lot of information about the relationship between the Lega and the Russians, and not just political, but also alleged financial relation between the Russians and the Lega, we knew at the time very few things about a very strong relationship between at least some Italian politicians of the five stars and the Russians. They went to Moscow, invited in the Congress of United Russia, and they was the five-star emissaries, the first foreign emissaries to speak after the Russian politician in Moscow in the Congress of United Russia. This is not well known, but the current vice foreign minister in Italy, Manlio Di Stefano, was the man who had the unlikely honor to speak first as foreign guest at the Congress in Moscow of the Putin's party. So this is just politics, not financial funding. And there is a lot of relationship between other guys in the five-star, Alessandro Di Battista, or the president of the Foreign Commission in the Senate in Italy, Vito Petrocelli, with the Russians. But above all, there is a very strong fight that the Italian five-star Lega government made against to lift the sanctions to Russia. If you look at every vote, not just in Italy, but also every motion in the European Parliament, you have from the Italian side always two parties which are opposing the sanction, or at least not voting pro-sanctions, and they are the Liga and the Five Star Movement. Why did the Five Star decide to be so close politically to Russia? This is another matter. What I can say for sure is that the former vice president of Barack Obama, the current American candidate Joe Biden, and his main counsel about Russia, Michael Carpenter, they wrote on Foreign Affairs that they were reasonably sure of foreign funding from Russia, not just to Lega, but also to the Italian Five Stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very worrying. You have also discovered that Russia's support to Italy during the coronavirus crisis was in fact an intelligence gathering and propaganda operation. What does this situation tell you about Putin's Russia?
Wait, what we wrote on La Stampa, and then in collaboration with La Stampa and Coda Story, we wrote basically 2 or 3 things. The first one was that the so-called Russian aids to Italy have been organized without any sort of public statement from the Italian government. So the Italian government, which is always so close to communicate every little things they do, they didn't say absolutely anything about the Russian aids. There was just a very shy statement from the Palazzo Chigi, from the Premiership office, that there has been a phone call between Vladimir Putin and Giuseppe Conte on a Sunday in late March. And then they agreed to any sort of cooperation between Italy and Russia. No mention of 100 doctors, but not just doctors, military doctors from the Defense Ministry of Russia, sent in Italy through cargo military planes, and sent in Italy with at least 22 military trucks across the peninsula, the Italian peninsula. They landed in Rome, nearby Rome, in the Pratica di Mare airport, and so they made a huge propaganda trip to the north in Bergamo, 600 kilometers away from Rome. This was for sure the first thing. The Italian government didn't communicate anything precise about that. The second one is why to give a gift to Putin of this huge propaganda operation, Russian trucks going across the country with Russian flags, and a lot of very suspicious account celebrating the kindness and the enormous help coming in from Russia. The second one is that according to different sources and different and separate sources, military sources, Italian and foreign sources, there was a very huge confidence that the men sent in Italy, there was a huge overlap, I'm quoting from the sources, between this part of the Russian Defense Ministry and the secret military services of Russia. A huge overlap. And the third, there are a lot of things I could do on this topic, but just last one. The Italian army already, it was said that the Russians was sending mobile labs for chemical and biological cleansing of entire areas. But what we know for sure is that according not just to the Italian militaries, but also according to the NATO, Italy already possesses one of the very best chemical and bacteriological cleansing battalion within the Italian army. So the very simple question is, why do we need the Russian one? While we are not a country without a chemical and biological army lab. We have one of the best all over the entire NATO. So why do we need the Russian chemical and biological labs here? So this is a very huge story, and we could also, as you know, it ended up with a very threatening statement from Russia to us at La Stampa about our reporting. But there was no, in terms of facts, there was no any reliable denial of that, of what we reported.
Yes, and you also received the support of the European Union.
Yes, of course. Much more from the European Union, for example, from the Vice President Vera Jourova, much more from Europe than from the Italian Prime Minister, because the entire issue has been treated personally, has been managed personally from the Italian Prime Minister with the Russian President Putin. Also bypassing the Italian Foreign Ministry, which has been increasingly close to our traditional Atlantic values and alliances.
Very, very worrying indeed. And Jacopo, what is your message to our politicians in Europe? What do you think European democracies should do to deal with Russia on the international scene?
Well, I think that we are united as Europeans, but we are also separated yet as single countries. So there are different countries in Europe. One is the attitude of, for example, of the President Macron, of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She has been, as you know, very, very strong in recent months against the Russian meddling, also in Germany. And in Italy, we have been not just a very traditional foreign policy, which goes back to the Italian Democrazia Cristiana, very strongly, firmly allied with the United States, but also very close to Moscow. So the Lega and the Five Star are the political consequence of this tradition. They just go through this and made much more of dangerous mistakes that I suppose the ancient Christian Democrats would have not done. So basically, what we could do, for example, to enforce the sanction, not to make a political fight against the sanction to Russia. Sanctions are due to Russian invasion in Crimea, and we know that Russia is only knocked when we knocked their economic and financial interests, the way they are pumping money through the Western and European countries, especially through London, but also through Italy. So it's weird, just to make one example, to see Igor Sechin, the CEO of Rosneft, who is every year the main guest at the Italian Russian forum in Verona, in the north of Italy. Sechin is a man who has been second one targeted from the American and European Union sanctions. So why this guy is in Italy to speak about business and cooperation between the Italian companies and Russian ones, for example, in the oil, in the energy, in the gas. This is, I think, very worrying. It will be enough to enforce the sanction, not to mention, for example, the Magnitsky laws that many countries already have.
Well, Jacopo Iacoboni, thank you so much for your very interesting analysis and very useful.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining.
Okay, thanks.